day, everybody. Today we're going to be learning about community structure and dynamics, mainly how different members of a community interact with one each other and how that affects the community and later on the ecosystem. So your target today, write this in the top margin. Students can explain the relationship among ecological niches, abiotic factors, and biotic factors. Students can give examples of organisms and its ecological niche. So what is a community? We talked about the different levels of organization. A community is an assemblage of all the populations living close enough together for potential interactions. So in here we see zebras, we see the grasses, we see the acacia trees, we see an antelope, a gazelle out there. And then there's lots of things that we don't see. The insects in the grass, there's bacteria, fungi, all those things are living in the same area and interacting with one another. So the BECBO is a little acronym we use to remember these levels of organization. It was in your targets last week. We're going to review it again this week. So organism, just a single organism. Right here we're looking at the goose. If we have multiple of this same species, we're going to have a population. Then you add multiple populations together and you get a community, just like I talked about a little earlier. We have the trees, we have the squirrel, we have all these different things working together. An ecosystem is going to be that community, plus we're going to include the abiotic factors such as the water and the weather at the time. Not the climate, but the weather, like if it was raining, if it's windy, those sorts of things. A biome is going to include the climate, and depending on the latitudes, how far away you are from the center of the Earth, the equator, and the ocean currents and the wind patterns, you're going to have similar climates, and those climates are going to be what make up the different biomes, those accumulations of ecosystems. So you have desert biomes that tend to be at the edge of the tropical areas right here. You often have tropical areas that are close to the equator, rainforests down a little bit below the equator. So all these things are going to have large effects, general patterns with our different types of ecosystems. And lastly, all those biomes together add up to make our biosphere. And theoretically, there could be biospheres on other planets, but the one we focus on, of course, is on Earth. So you should be able to review and think back, look at your notes. What is an autotroph? And if you remember, an autotroph is something that makes its own food. For example, we have plants. A lot of times you think about plants, like this fern right here. But there are other types of autotrophs. Algae is really common. We talked about algae a lot. But there are even some other types of autotrophs that don't use solar radiation. They have another energy source. That energy source is going to be chemosynthesis. We talked about this before with the deep sea vents like you see right here. Coming out of this, hydrogen and sulfur is dissolved into the water, this hot water, and those chemicals are used to build different sulfur compounds, which they can then turn into sugars to break down and use as food. So our ecosystem down here, its main source of energy is the chemicals from the earth and the heat from the earth and not the sun. This far down, there's no sunlight. So these entire food chains build off of the bacteria that produce these sulfur compounds and this sugar. So autotrophs made their own food. So a heterotroph then is going to be something that needs to consume or get its energy from something else. We have lots of heterotrophs. This is one of the most common misconceptions, is that fungi, these mushrooms, are plants and they make their own energy. It's not true. they consume their energy, or they really absorb their energy from dead and decaying matter. These mushrooms are actually the fruiting bodies, or call them the sexual part of a fungus that's actually just underneath the top surface of the soil here. It's part of the sexual life cycle. Here we have a cute little turtle. It's consuming this plant. Starfish are actually predators. They go around and consume other shellfish and other organisms. We have this herbivorous snail. We have two consumers right here. We have an amoeba, and then we also have this paramecium. These are single-celled protists. They are going to be heterotrophs. They don't do photosynthesis. They consume their food. And bottom right hand, this is probably the most confusing thing, is this is a sponge. It's not a plant. It's part of the phylum Porifera, which they siphon in water, and they push that water through and filter feed out and catch little phytoplankton and other plankton, other small organisms, and they consume their food that way. So we're going to be paying attention to different types of interactions between the groups. Interspecific interactions are between two different species. They happen when populations of community compete for the same limited resources. We have competition, predation, herbivory, symbiosis. Those are just a few. So competition. All of these organisms, the trees, the birds, the giraffe, the gazelle, the zebras, all of these are competing with each other for territory, for the water's probably the most obvious thing here, and they're actually putting themselves at danger. If this zebra gets the water, that's water that the giraffe's not going to get, or the plant's not going to get. It's a lose-lose situation during competition. In predation, it's a lose-win, plus minus. If the cougar eats the gazelle definitely loses, the cougar wins. Here we have a beaver. It's herbivorous, it's eating plant matter, and the plant loses, the beaver wins. Symbiosis is a relationship between two different organisms that are usually touching, interacting in that way. You see the classic clownfish with the sea anemone. And there are different types of symbiosis. The first type we're going to talk about is parasitism. And here we see these roundworms, these heartworms that have infected either a dog or cat heart here. And they are actually infected through something called a vector. A vector is a living organism that carries this parasite or the pathogen, the disease. And so the mosquito is getting blood from a cat or a dog, and if it bites one that is containing these heartworms, it's going to pass it on to other dogs and cats, and they get the disease that way. They eventually might be bitten again. So one thing that we do now is that if you have a pet that spends a lot of time outside, you can go and get heartworm medicine that prevents these from growing. I'll go back real quick. Didn't mention it, but this can be deadly and often is deadly to the animal. The heartworms will reproduce and grow and take up space till they cause that. Right here you can see the heart is actually breaking and being destroyed, and that's going to lead to the death of the animal. Here's another example of parasitism. We're going to watch the video.
I'm about to introduce you to one of the grossest creatures on Earth. It's the tongue-eating isopod, Symathoa exigua. Isopods are crustaceans like lobsters and crabs. This particular isopod happens to live in the ocean and is a parasite. It's a sort of marine louse, only it's way creepier.
Hey.
Anyway, the first crazy thing to know about these guys is that they're what's called proto-andritic hermaphrodites. That means that when they're adults, the males can become females. These isopods infest fish, So what happens is that a number of juveniles enter through the fish's gills and all mature into males. Then, one of the isopods will become a female, and that's when things get really freaky. The female will crawl into the fish's mouth and attach herself to the base of the fish's tongue using her back legs. Then, she'll suck blood from the tongue until it withers and dies. This procedure is quite unpleasant for the fish, but it doesn't kill it. In fact, it starts using the parasite like a prosthetic tongue. Meanwhile, the isopod just continues to hang out in the fish's mouth, sucking its blood or feeding on fish mucus. We don't know a ton about the parasite's life cycle, but based on other mouth-infesting isopods, and yes, there are others, the female may even mate while in the fish's mouth, with male isopods living in the fish's gill chamber. I know this doesn't sound real, so here's a photograph of a mouth-infesting isopod to prove it. Thankfully, these guys don't infest humans, but they do infest fish that we eat. Symbiosis exigua has a preference for snapper, and other mouth-infesting isopods prey upon mahi-mahi or barramundi. So the next time you're at the grocery store, take a look inside that red snapper's mouth. You might find a tasty treat inside. Ew.
Another type of interspecific interaction is going to be mutualism. Here, both parties benefit. So we have the acacia tree, which has these horn spikes that come out of it on its branches that are used to help protect it so woodpeckers, different birds don't come in, break it down, bugs, stay away. But not only that, but there is a mutualistic relationship between ants and the acacia tree, and actually some fungus and plants. The ants use the little columns inside of these horns, inside these spikes, and they live inside there. And what they do is they bring plants in there, actually kind of farm fungus. So there's another little mutualistic relationship happening there. And the reason that the ants are here and the tree likes the ants is if these bugs come on or small animals come on, the little ants will come out of these spikes and attack it to help protect the tree further. So the ants get a place to live, a place to farm, and the tree gets a place, gets these little ants to help protect them. So there's that mutualistic win-win benefit. Another example of this mutualism, just to bring it back to something we talked about in previous weeks, is we have the relationship between, right here, the nitrogen-fixing bacteria that live in these little nodules right here, and the peanuts themselves, or different legumes. And so the nitrogen-fixing bacteria get materials, the waste products, some of the necessary components living in the roots, and then the peanuts actually get the fixed nitrogen, the ammonia and nitrates and nitrites that the bacteria provide. So again, a win-win situation. Again, that's mutualism, win-win. This is a little bit more controversial, is commensalism, kind of a meh and a win. So we have these remora fish that are sticking on the shark. The shark's not really eating them or harming them, but they get the algae, the leftover food, and things that are growing by them that these guys don't eat. Now, there is probably some benefit in dealing with health, cleanliness, but the shark could live just fine without it. But there's probably a slight benefit. So we call it commensalism. There's definitely benefit for the remora, but nothing really big deal for the shark. So we're going to watch a little video here. Let's see what type of interspecific interaction you see here.
The bald-headed eagle.
golden-headed eagles catching these salmon. So that's obviously going to be predation. Here's another little video from National Geographic. What type of interaction do we see here?
Our parasitized caterpillar has spent the last 12 days gorging itself. It now appears profoundly obese. But this is not all fat. The glomerata wasp larvae lie just under its skin. Each is the size of a grain of rice, but together they account for over a third of the caterpillar's weight. The larvae have not yet finished growing and need to keep their host alive. So although they feast on the caterpillar's blood, they have been careful not to touch a single one of its vital organs. This uneasy truce will not last. Within days, the larvae are fully matured. Suddenly, they begin to stir into action. For the past 2 weeks, this surrogate womb has protected them, but now they no longer need it. To complete the next stage of their life cycle, they must break out. The caterpillar's thick skin should be a solid barrier to the parasitic wasp larvae. But as their bodies have grown, they have developed tiny, saw-like teeth. These jagged jaws are for one job only: cutting their way out. Stroke by stroke, the larvae slice through the tough layers of skin. At the same time, they release chemicals that paralyze the caterpillar. As the larvae break through, there is nothing it can do. Free at last, the larvae enter a new phase of development. They swiftly spin silken cocoons. These will provide the perfect environment for their final transformation. But ironically, one of the greatest dangers the larvae will face is being themselves impregnated by other species of parasitic wasp. Incredibly, the wounded caterpillar helps them out. Usually, a caterpillar would spin a silken blanket to make its own cocoon. But the parasitized caterpillar spins his blanket on top of the wasp cocoons, giving them an extra layer of protection. Scientists believe the same wasp virus that infected it weeks before has now invaded the caterpillar's brain and caused this bizarre corruption of its normal behavior. Amazingly, the caterpillar's natural aggression is now also exploited by the wasp virus. The caterpillar becomes a bodyguard, actively protecting the cocoons from other parasites. It will watch over them unceasingly until it eventually starves to death.
So that was parasitism. Here's another type. What do you think this is? Here we have the bird hopping around on the rhino, getting some of the insects and bugs. This you may be able to argue as either commensalism or mutualism. I'd argue it more towards commensalism. Yes, it's likely limiting the infection and disease, but it's more annoying the rhino than anything. The rhino would be able to survive without it. It's not that straight up mutualistic relationship. Intraspecific, so not inter but intra, is within the same species. So we're going to have competition, lots of different types of competition, sexual competition, those sorts of things. So animals of the same species interacting with one another. That's intraspecific, where inter was different species. Examples: competition, mating, communication, all of those things are intraspecific. Then we can also talk about ecological niches. Why do we get these different specializations? So species use specific biotic and abiotic resources in the environment to survive, and they're going to interact with those different resources. So here we have 3 monkeys all living in the same, relatively same area, 2 different monkeys. We have spider monkeys, which are going to rely on fruits more, and then we have the pygmy marmoset, which is going to rely on the gum of the tree, and that's what it uses for its food. So we say these guys are mostly frugivorous, these guys are mostly gumivores. And so even though they're close related, living in the same area, they're using different resources. These guys are interacting with the fruit higher up in the canopy, and these guys are closer to the middle of the canopy, relying on the gum. So another example we're going to see with our picture of these waterfowl. They're interacting with different layers, these abiotic factor of the water, and the biotic factors are going to be their food. This one's filter feeding for crustaceans. This guy's dipping his head trying to get different plants and seeds, snails, things like that. This one's going for the surface with insects near the surface of the water. This guy's getting bivalves, so clams, that sort of thing. And this guy's getting for little small insects just on the sand. So they're all in the same area on the beach here, but taking advantage of different resources. So this is what we call these different niches. So the question is, how do population density might affect interspecific or intraspecific interaction? So population density, remember we talked about clumped, we talked about uniform, we talked about random, and then also how many, not just those different patterns, but how many there are. And what you would predict is that as the population density increases, the intraspecific interactions increase. Just like if you think about people, when are you going to run into more people? Are you going to run into more people in the middle of New York City or out in the middle of the country? That sort of thing. So lastly, go ahead and read through your notes, look through your targets, go ahead and chunk your notes, come up with key terms, start possible test questions, write any points of confusion. All right, advertise those Cornell notes. Thank you very much. Have a good day.